Well, hello, and a really big welcome to St John's College, where we have the privilege to hold the SRUK Patient Conference. I have to shamelessly admit that it was time to coincide with the International Scleroderma workshop, because that means that we pull in some of the world's leading experts on scleroderma and other areas. So we've been piggybacking and we've been allowed to piggyback. So thank you very much to the organisers of the International Scientific Workshop. I'm particularly honoured that we've been joined by Professor Grandame Carol Black, one of the original group of far-sighted clinicians who started this workshop, because actually she recognised that as a rare disease, you're only going to make progress with scleroderma when everybody works collaboratively. That's when you're going to see real progress. And I think what you'll hear today is that there's been a lot of progress made. There are more treatments available, and there's some really exciting developments. So yes, we've got a really, hopefully a good programme. I hope you will agree. Now, Carol is no stranger to our community. She began her career in rheumatology and set up the internationally renowned research centre at the Royal Free Hospital in London. The one thing amongst many that I think stands out about Carol is that she's always wanted to see the patient as a whole person. She's wanted to understand your life, your family, your work, because you are more than just the condition. And it's really important to look at a person in the whole. So it's no surprise that since she moved on from rheumatology, but always remains firmly connected to it, that she's led a number of government reviews which are seeking to make improvements and to better the lives of people. So I'm really delighted to welcome to the stage Carol.
Sue, thank you very much, and a deep welcome to you all. Of course, I lived part of my life in Cambridge, so I'm particularly pleased to welcome you to this city, although I think of it as a town. I have to tell you, I'm married to a man who is a fellow of next door, of Trinity, so I get into trouble every time that we have it here in St John's and not in Trinity. But then I tell him that Trinity doesn't have anywhere big enough for us to have it. Now in Trinity, we have held this in Trinity before, but their conference facilities, I think it would be fair to say, are not as good as St John's. So we should be very happy to be here. I do hope if you have any time at all, you might just take a glimpse at a little bit of Cambridge, because it is a wonderful town that as you walk along by the colleges, I always think of it being there for so many hundreds of years, and all those years ago, the academics would have walked in their gowns through these streets and through the back corridors. What is really important about having the patient part before we start to talk about the science, it's very easy when you go to a scientific conference to get very involved in the science, but you do have to remember that there wouldn't be a disease to investigate if we didn't have patients. So throughout my long career in scleroderma, patients have been incredibly important. And I owe, in fact, a great debt of gratitude to patients, because when I first got involved, we had very few drugs for this condition, and we did not have a good enough, in anywhere near good enough scientific base. And so many of the people who've gone before you were kind enough and willing to let us have them as part of our clinical trials, giving skin samples, giving blood samples. Really, when we really didn't have as much of a base to say, we really know that this is going to make a difference. They were, in a way, part of a journey of experimentation, in a way, of course, fully signed up for that. But we didn't have big industry and companies interested in this rare disease, because the argument, of course, I still remember when I tried to get my first grant from the Department of Health, and I went to try and tell them how important scleroderma was. They said, well, you know, Carol, not many people get it. I said, well, if you do get it, it matters desperately. And you're quite likely, if you have the worst form of the disease, not to have a good prognosis. So its rarity is not really an excuse for not doing it. But gradually, as I think you will know, over the years, due to the work of people who are sitting in front of me, like Chris Denton, Marco Matucci, we really have been able to bring the pharmaceutical industry along with the topic of fibrosis and scleroderma, vascular disease, and the immunology that's associated with it. And you, the patients around the world, actually have gone with us and joined in those studies. Because remember, we can't do the studies at all without you. We can't do the clinical work. Of course, we can do work in laboratories. Of course, we can do animal work. But in the end, you have got to be able to try the product of all that research work and show that it works and benefits patients. And internationally, we are, and I like to think of this, we are a family of people who really desperately want to see as much of scleroderma cracked as possible. We've still, of course, a long way to go. But year on year, I've seen greater collaboration, patient groups around the world working together, and therefore making these trials possible. Because I think you're all aware, scleroderma isn't just, if you like, one disease. There are subsets of it with different organ involvement. So you may want to do a research trial on lung disease, either pulmonary hypertension or fibrosis. You've got to be able to choose your patient population very carefully, so you're matching the patient population to the compound that you think will help them. And so I just want to say, the first thing I wanted to say was a huge thank you to you all for being part of that journey, because we couldn't genuinely do it without you. And then secondly, what I've seen over the years, which pleases me, is the patient voice has got louder. Doctors have an awful habit of thinking they know what's best. I mean, it's just part of the way we're trained, and in a sense, I think we've got better at it, and education's got better. But in fact, if you listen to what matters to patients about their disease, that is truly important. I mean, we may be very concentrated on how do you stop pulmonary hypertension, and how do you improve pulmonary fibrosis, and we're concentrated on that particular organ. It may be for the patient, as winter comes, that their finger ulcers are the most important thing for them in the immediacy. So you need very much to hear what the patient is telling you about their condition. And as Sue has said, it always has concerned me. And I've gone on, as she said, to do a lot of work on the social determinants of health. It's where you live. It's, do you have or want to have work? Can you find it? Is your disease interfering with your work and your family life, etc.? It's far more than the medical conditions. So I'm very pleased, and it is through organisations like Scleroderma and Raynaud's UK that the patient voice and what the patient wants is heard, and is heard very very fully. So they were the two big things I wanted to say. I've been very privileged that although many years ago I handed over to Chris and David in the laboratory and Voon and all the other people who are in the Royal Free department, they have kept me very close to them, and I feel very much part of the Royal Free family. And Marco, and I do thank him sort of publicly and personally here, has kept me very involved in world scleroderma. So I've never really left the condition. I'm passionately interested in solving some of the very deep problems of it. And for me, although this is always a wonderful occasion, I founded the Scleroderma Research Workshop with a wonderful man called Joseph Korn, an American working in Boston, who sadly died of cancer quite a few years ago now. But Joe's absolute drive to understand what was causing scleroderma or its complications is always with me, and I always feel his presence when we come here, because he loved it when we brought this conference to Cambridge. So you've got a wonderful program with great speakers. I've said too much. I just wish you all a wonderful day. But one thing, you have to ask questions. And if I were talking to you and you weren't putting your hands up, I would get a bit choosy. I'm a bit picky. Now, Chris is probably too shy to do that. You'll have to help him. You have to put your hands up. And please do ask questions. It's really important.
Thank you so much, Carol. And I think for us as a community, it's absolutely amazing that you have stayed connected, because you have that knowledge, that breadth of expertise. But as I said at the beginning, it's also about your attitude and your belief in patient voice that I think is so, so important. And so it's a real honour that SRUK has you as our president. So thank you very much for everything that you do.